Okay, so I'm noticing a little bit of a problem here. Welcome to part 4 of the digital map case build, where I show you everything you need to know about how to build your own. So far, we've covered what a digital map case is, the materials that you'll use, what equipment you'll need, and how to cut the wood. And I even just released a bonus video, part 3.5, of how to engrave your project without the need for a big fancy engraver. If you're enjoying this series so far, I can't emphasize enough how much it's been helping those of you that have been liking the videos and commenting down below, and especially those of you that are subscribing, which is a great idea to do, by the way, because you get notifications as the next parts come out before we finish this thing up and give it away. So a big shout out to all of you that have been showing support. In today's video, we'll be covering how to fasten the sides of the case together in a strong enough manner that will hold up to the test of time. And like in my previous videos, I'm going to go over several different methods, so that way anyone of any skill level has a different option that they can utilize when building their own. Alright, enough chatter, let's do it.
Is it real or just a dream? It's time for MooreDnD. A world of danger mystery.
Alright, it is a cold one today, but I have saved you the time of seeing me pull all the supplies we're going to use out for this video, and I've laid everything out here on the table. And you'll see I've put on the table a plastic sheet, and that's because we're going to be gluing up stuff today, and I don't want to get that glue on my table, which is made of MDF, a material we talked about before that will soak up that stuff and swell up, and it'll just mess up my surface. So we're going to protect it with some sheeting, and we're going to go ahead and go through our supplies here. So of course you can see the wood that we've cut so far, along with the engraved side that we did in the last video if you haven't seen that. But then we've got all the stuff we're going to use to glue all this together, including, of course, the glue. But we also have something called a glue brush. This is a silicone brush that wood glue doesn't stick to. So you can use this to spread it around on the wood, and then when the glue dries, you can pull it right off of the silicone. Now these two beasts here in front of me are clamps, and we're going to be using them to pull the boards together on both sides to really solidify that glue up. Now I have a big air compressor over up against the wall, but I also have this pancake air compressor that I used to use all the time, and figured I'd break it out for this video, so that way if you're looking for an air compressor that you want to use for something like this, you can use one of these. They're a little bit cheaper, very versatile, and you can move them wherever you need them. To go along with that compressor, we have two different types of nail guns. We have a brad nailer, which I mentioned before we're going to be using in today's project. Might be a little overkill for what we need, because it's actually going to push those boards together and hold them, but it leaves a little hole, and I'll show you how to fix that hole. The other one is a pin nailer, and the pins do not have a head on top, so it doesn't necessarily pull the boards together, but what it does is when you're gluing something together, you send the pins through, and that keeps the boards from shifting while the glue sets. That would actually be a really good option for this project, but we want to have a little bit more pull strength when we're doing this, so I'm going to go with the brad nails instead. And that pretty much goes over everything that we're going to use for this part today, with the exception of you're finally going to see why we needed that chisel, which I'll cover here shortly. I'll also discuss some other ways you can do these steps as we move through them. But first things first, we finally have to test our cuts and make sure that our TV fits. All right, let's put this baby to the test. Get that kind of lined up. Okay, so I'm noticing a little bit of a problem here. I'm going to test a theory real quick, and then we'll talk about it. Yep. So something that I told you guys to pay attention to in the second video, and I did not, is to check your lumber dimensions. When I bought this, it was finished, so when they said an inch, I assumed that meant closer to 3/4, but this is actually a full inch board. So when I cut this length to dimension, assuming we had 1.5 inches thickness between these two boards, because they were each 3/4 of an inch, that board is now short on one end because these two boards are thicker than I thought they were. Not a problem, I am able to fix it, and that means that we get to see me use the planer, which is a really, really cool tool. But just goes to show, check your dimensions before you start working on it. All right, this beast here is my DeWalt 13-inch planer. We're gonna go over how this works first, and then I'm just gonna shoot some video of me running the boards through. But it's actually really, really simple. The way that the whole thing works is there's a roller on that side. That's the feed side where the boards come in. There's a roller here, and then in the middle, there's this rotating cylinder, essentially, of these long knives that spin this way, and they cut the top of the board to give it a nice surface as the board comes through. That surface is gonna match whatever you have on the bottom. So even if you send a board with a flat bottom that's kind of crooked up top, it's going to surface it down slowly but surely as you send the board through more and more until you get a nice flat board that's the exact same parallel on either side. Now, as I mentioned, you're gonna send the boards through a few times because you can only shave off so much of the wood at a time. So you can raise and lower the machine with this giant handle on the other side. You match it to the current thickness minus just a little bit, and then every time you send it through, you bring it down maybe about 1/16 of an inch each time, maybe a little bit more if you really wanna try and hog something out. But eventually, you'll shave off enough to get down to the desired thickness that you need. Now, this machine is extremely dangerous if you're not treating it correctly. Number one, when this thing's plugged in, your hand should never go underneath of here. Those blades could seriously mess you up. Now, on a less dangerous but still serious note, this is a very, very loud machine. One of the loudest I have in the shop. So when you're using it, definitely want some kind of ear pro in it. It also shoots out a ton of sawdust out of this hole right here. So you'll see when I'm running it through, I'm gonna have my shop vac plugged up to this thing so it's sucking all the sawdust out instead of flinging it into the workshop. Now we're gonna go ahead and get started, but before we do that, if you messed up like I did, it's not a big deal. Your local lumberyard will actually do this for you. Again, it might cost a little bit of a charge, but almost any lumberyard is gonna have some kind of planing machine that they can use for you. All right, let's plug it in and get going. Then when you see that little red arrow move, that means it's officially touched the board, and it's kind of a guide to how much you're gonna be taking off as you go. But I usually just go till I hit it, and that means that I can start there and just slowly work my way down. I don't really worry about that gauge too much. As happens, I blew a breaker, I turned on too much stuff, so had to plug in the vacuum outside. Okay, so I'm confident that I have not gotten there yet because I haven't done enough passes, but you do want to check intermittently to make sure you haven't reached that thickness that you're going for. I have these little measuring blocks here that gives you an exact thickness to just measure up to. So this is the 3/4 one, and I'm just gonna keep using this until the wood gets down to this thickness. All right, hopefully that solved our problem. We're gonna go test this here in a minute, but I did want to talk about one quick thing about using the planer before we move on. You may have noticed that I was sending all the boards in almost one after another, or even sometimes side by side, and that's because I wanted to minimize something called snipe. Snipe is an occurrence that happens when you send a board through, it's gonna hit the first roller, and that roller is ever so slightly gonna lift that side of the planer. You can't even see it with your eyes, but it happens. Then as the board goes through, it gets hit by the knives and starts to cut, but when it hits the second roller, that second roller lifts also to even it out. But in that interim, there's a little bit of a taper at the end of your board where the thing was slanted. That also occurs as the board gets to the end and the first roller comes off. Now it slants backwards, and then when it hits the second roller, it leaves the roller and you have another taper. It's really, really hard to eliminate totally. There's a couple different things that you can do, but you also want to make sure you're running your boards in consecutively, so that way, no matter what, the second roller as it's going through is always the same height, as long as all your boards are the same height. Until, of course, it gets to the last board, and then you're gonna have a taper there. So the first board and the last board are probably gonna have a slight taper. If you've honed your machine in really nicely, hopefully you won't even see it, but if you do, you just use a sander and kind of even it out as much as you can, and eventually you won't see it. All right, let's go test our theory. All right, significantly better. We are end to end now. We can get started with the rest of the video I had planned. Okay, so you may have noticed that I am intentionally leaving one board off to the side, and that is because we're finally gonna get into why we need a chisel. This is the sensor for the remote to the TV, and it is going to get in the way right now if I were to try and put the board up against it. So we need to chisel out this piece on the board that's gonna go here so that when the box goes down, it'll fit over the TV. We do have some little angles here on the side. I can try to match them, or I can just make it a square that goes around. I'll see what I end up doing when I go to cut it out. But we're gonna put the boards together first, and then I'll chisel it out after. But let's go ahead and measure everything now before we get started. All right, it's better to go shorter than longer, because if you go long, it's not gonna fit. So it's right at about 18 1/4, so we're gonna call it 18 1/8 from this side. I'm gonna double check the other side to make sure that it's centered. I'm assuming that it is. And it is. We've got 18 and an eighth on that side too. So I need to make sure that I chisel it in 18 and an eighth from either side, but we also need to measure how thick this is, which looks about a 1/4 inch, so we're gonna call it 5/16, and then we need to measure how deep it goes. You can go all the way through the board if you want to, but I don't think I'm gonna do that. All right, we've got roughly 2 inches. So that's all of our measurements that we need. We can use that now to cut it out of the board without having to use the TV over and over again for measurements. All right, let's get this thing glued up. Once we start the gluing process, it has about 10 minutes before it starts to harden and set up, so I'm not gonna do much talking during that part, but essentially all I'm gonna be doing is gluing the areas where the 2 boards are gonna be touching, and you wanna add a lot. Do not be scared to over glue this thing. The more glue, the better. You're gonna squeeze it out anyway when you tighten it, but you wanna make sure you get as much surface area as possible. Then, once the ends are glued together, you're gonna wanna use your clamps to put a lot of compression on them, after which we're gonna use our brad nailer to seal it into place. Okay, we got lots of glue on our hand, which is fine because the other beauty of wood glue is that it is water soluble. So while it's still wet, and especially on the outsides of your projects and everything, you use a wet paper towel, you can clean everything right up before it hardens. Okay, 2 more things to do while it's setting. Number 1, we're gonna square it up one last time just to make sure that it hardens in a nice square state. And then the second thing is we're gonna send those brad nails through. All right, if you go to brad nail your project, there is a correct way to do it, but number 1, you want to definitely make sure you have your safety glasses. These nails can fly out of this board, and at that point, they're just flying projectiles that could land right there. So make sure you have these on. Let's talk about why there's a specific way to do it. These brad nails are actually kind of flat. And so there is a long way the nail goes and a very short way. It wants to curve along that long edge. And so if you were to do it like this, and if it were to curve, it would come out of the board. It would just shoot out. So if you manage to do it with the nail this way, if it goes to curve, it's actually just curving up into the thickness of the wood, either up or down. So you wanna make sure you do it that way, and mine, and probably most of them, I got a little air leak in this hose, it shoots like this. Not like this, it shoots like this. So it wants to curve left or right. So when I go through, I wanna make sure it's like this, so that way it curves up or down into the wood. And I'll show you here what it looks like when it goes through. You can see that nail right there. I know you can't really tell that it's vertical like that, but if that were in wood and it wanted to curve, it would either go this way or this way. All right, let's go ahead and shoot it into the wood here. So we wanna line it up nice and even with our board that's here. You gotta push with this one. It's got a little push trigger at the end of it. Then you squeeze the trigger. And we are in the wood. Now, I didn't get that as deep as I wanted to. We're gonna fix that here shortly. But I'm gonna go ahead and try to reach in the bottom here without moving this. Man, this hose needs to be fixed. All right, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get the gun on the bottom of that one yet, so we're gonna have to come back to that one. But I'm gonna go ahead and do the other 4 corners. Now let's talk about how you could do this without a brad nailer. Number 1, if you happen to have a pin nailer for whatever reason, you could be using that. Number 2, you don't need to nail or screw it at all. The glue is strong enough, but we're gonna do this just for a little added extra measure of strength. But also, if you're using a drill or a driver, like I mentioned, with some screws, you could screw these in together. You might not like the look of the screw head sticking out of the side, so one way to go about fixing that is if you drill it a little bit deeper, you can then use something to plug that hole that looks more like this wood, whether that be some kind of putty, or you can use a trick that we're actually gonna use here shortly where you can mix the sawdust from this. If you use a sander and get some sawdust, you can mix the sawdust of this with some wood glue, get kind of like a paste, and then put that in it. And that at least gives you a similar color to the wood. You're gonna see the circle, but it gives you a similar color, so it blends in a little bit more. We are gonna go over that shortly, so I'll show you when we get there. All right, so some of the brad nails stuck out a little bit more than I want to. The air pressure wasn't enough for them to go deep in, so we're gonna go ahead and fix that with whatever this tool is called. I'm sure that I've been told before, but it's literally just a metal pointed object for you to be able to hit tiny things into. So we need that and a hammer. So I'm gonna go ahead and hammer this in, and then it's gonna leave a deeper hole, and at that point we'll be able to fix it with that concoction I just told you about. Cool, now we've got a hole to plug up, but that's fine. I'm not gonna say that brad nail was that obvious. It's way less obvious than nails or screws, but it's something that would have ticked me off, so we fixed it. I got a few more to go, and then we'll get to the next part, which is chiseling. All right, so there's a lot of people out there on the internet that are wicked with hand tools, including chisels, and I am not one of them. I am a big machinist guy. I like to use the machines to do it for me. But this doesn't have to be perfect. We just need to make sure that TV's gonna fit in, and we wanna keep the top part that's gonna be visible, because everything else is gonna be hidden under the TV. We wanna keep that part nice. So theoretically, I probably should have done this before I glued it together, but I figured I could do it while it's gluing. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. If you remember correctly, it was 18 1/8 from the end, but it was 18 1/8 from the end of the TV. Make sure you don't put it on the end of the box. Instead, put it on the inside of the box because that's where the end of the TV is gonna go. And we need to measure out 18 1/8. Now, I did forget to bring a pencil. Give me 1 second. I also forgot to bring this over. We'll talk about that in a second. So we need 18 1/8, which I'm seeing is right about here. And it's okay to draw on your piece because we're gonna sand this at the end and that'll take away all the pencil marks. So now I need to do the same thing from the other side. Again, going from the inside, 18 1/8. All right. So we've got that. This cool little gadget here is actually a T-square, which I know I missaid in the first video, but it's for drawing really, really accurate lines at a distance that you need. And in this instance, we need 5/16 of an inch, and this is gonna do that perfectly. So we line it up on the inside because that's where the sensor is, and we need to go 5/16 out. So these little marks right here show me 16ths, and I see 5/16 right here, and we're going to go the distance between our two crow's feet. And you just trace your line. And that right there is where our sensor is on the TV. Now we also need to make sure we go down 2 inches. I could use this for that, except for the fact that there's a table in the way, and I don't want to slide this off the table right now to be able to go through it. So we're just gonna use our tape measure and kind of estimate the 2 inches. This is the least important measurement of all of them. So we'll just go down approximately 2 inches. It's okay to go a little further. Okay, so that's how far down we're chiseling. So now you take your chisel, you take your hammer. Okay, that was awful. I am self-admittedly the worst person with a chisel in his hand, so I am not going to show you guys how you're supposed to chisel this. All I'm gonna do is recommend that you go look at different YouTube videos of people who are masters at their craft and really good with it. Because the last thing I'm gonna do to you guys is lie to you and show you the wrong way to do something. And so, as I started trying to do that, I realized how bad I was at it and decided I'm not gonna show that. I did end up changing my tactic a little bit, and I used a router with a flush trim bit that went down just the depth that I needed it to and kind of hand routed out that area. Not the best way to do it. I tend to only want to use the router when there's some kind of guide or fence for me to slide it down, but it got the job done and it ended up turning out okay. Now we still got to plug those holes, and I need to sand this thing to get some dust to mix with the glue that we're going to plug it with. So let's go ahead and give this thing one big sanding. All right, she is smooth, feeling good, and I didn't get much dust in that because I was using a really fine grit sandpaper there. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a coarse grit, and I'm gonna sand part of the boards that we cut off and don't need anymore just to get the right colored dust. So we've got plenty of the white oak dust now, and now I'm gonna mix in some wood glue, and there's no perfect amount to mix in. You just wanna get kind of like a paste substance. Then you're gonna take that paste and you're gonna fill in the holes. It's okay if it's a little outside of the hole because we're gonna end up sanding it down. But I'm also gonna use this to fill a couple other gaps that I saw on the board while I was sanding. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, I'm gonna give that a minute to harden up, and then we're gonna go ahead and sand that down. It's okay if it's not perfectly dry when I go to sand it because it'll finish drying in the little cracks and holes over time, as long as you don't mind messing up the sandpaper that you're gonna use for it. I will give you one other quick tip. If you have a small crack that's maybe just kind of annoying that it's there, but not enough to have to fill with something like that, like a paste, you can actually take some super glue, put it in the hole, and then sand over top of that. And all the sand that you kick up as you're sanding will fall into that gap, mix with the super glue, and fill in that hole on its own. All right, time to test our theory. So the first thing we gotta do is we're going to flip this upside down because we're gonna lay the TV flat on the table because it's gonna be all the way on the top of the case, so we wanna make sure that it's flipped. So I'm gonna lift this up, lay the TV down, then flip this upside down and put it around the TV. I think it's gonna be a snug fit to start, so I may have to kind of maneuver it a little bit to get it around it, but I'm hoping it's gonna work. TV's down, let's do it. Okay, that got a little scary for a minute. I thought it wasn't going down, it was getting stuck on the cellophane, not the TV, so once I moved that around, we were good to go. But it fits like a glove. I wish I could turn it over and look at it, but I can't. We'll have to do that once we start putting on the backing, which is going to be the next video. So make sure you subscribe, follow along so you can see the next videos as they come out and we finish up this display case and then give it away to somebody local.